Hello students, today we are going to cover an important chapter of class ninth history which is Socialism in Europe and the Russian Revolution. Now before starting the chapter, let me introduce myself a little bit. So I am Raghav Daksh, currently pursuing history honors from University of Delhi, College of Vocational Studies. Now let's start our chapter with the topic the age of social change. Now post French Revolution Europe. How is the post French Revolution Europe? So French Revolution took place and it came with certain ideas. So French Revolution inspired discussions of freedom and equality, challenging the existing estate-based aristocratic control of society. Now aristocratic here means the noble society that's present at the top of the hierarchy. So what happened was that after the French Revolution, many people got inspired by this revolution and started challenging the existing estate-based, nobles that were present in the society. It triggered the global debates on individual rights and social power impacting Europe, Asia, and colonies like India. So many countries got inspired, and especially if we talk about India, so in India, Raja Ram Mohan Roy, acted against the social evils that were already present in the society, such as Sati Pratha, and he worked on it and he abolished it at the end. So, societal change was interpreted and advocated in different forms. Some wanted complete transformation, others preferred gradual reform. So, as these ideas were spreading, people had different opinions about these. Some people wanted the complete transformation in the society. Meanwhile, others preferred gradual reforms, means the slow reforms. Now, political groups, liberals, radicals, and conservatives. Now, liberals, here we are talking about the time period of Russian Revolution. So, during the time of Russian Revolution, liberals were those people who tolerated all religions, means they wanted diversity. They wanted limits on dynastic rulers, means the top hierarchy, means the autocrat or either the monarch or the king. So, they were against him and protection of individual rights. They wanted protection of individual rights. They advocated elected parliaments, independent judiciary, but supported limited franchise. Means they wanted independent judiciary. They wanted the governance by the public, but they only supported the limited franchise. Means they usually supported the property owning men only, that they are only allowed to vote. But this was not a good thing. Opposed universal adult franchise and women's voting rights. They also opposed universal adult franchise and women's voting rights. Now, radicals. Radicals were the people who wanted government based on majority rule. They supported women's suffrage, they opposed privileges of large landowners and industrialists, and sought less concentration of property. So, they didn't want the private ownership of the property. They were against the large landowners and industrialists, but they also supported women's suffrage. Liberals did not want that women should have voting rights. Now, conservatives are there. Conservatives were the people they originally opposed to all change. By 19th century, accepted need for gradual, respectful reforms. Means, originally they were against the idea of transformation or the revolution. They wanted to preserve the traditional values that were already present in the society, but by 19th century, they accepted the need for gradual and respectful reforms. Now, industrial society and social change. Industrial revolution, growth of cities, expansion of railways, rise of factories took place during the time of industrial revolution, but with them social issues were also there, like long working hours, low wages, unemployment, poor housing and sanitation. Now, liberals and radicals responded to these issues. And how did they do it? They sought solution to industrial misery, believed that in individual effort and enterprise, supported development if work only if workforce and citizens were healthy and educated. So they wanted the individual rights. They wanted that individual efforts should be made, and people should care about the workers also, and the development will take place only if the workforce and citizens were healthy and educated. Now, nationalism and revolution happened. Many nationalists, liberals, and radicals collaborated with each other and they created a sort of group on revolutionary movements, and they started revolutionary movements aiming for equal rights and national building. For example, Giuseppe Mazzini in Italy. Now, Mazzini was a person who was leading in the Italy a revolutionary movement. Now, coming of socialism to Europe. Now, socialism emerged as an alternative vision for society, emphasizing community control over property for collective welfare. Now, according to socialism, the community control is the main thing. That the property should not, be controlled by a private owner or an individual. There should be a community control, and that's how we can achieve the collective welfare. Key figures such as Robert Owen. Now he established cooperative community, New Harmony in United States of America. Louis Blanc was the person who advocated for government encouraged cooperatives. Karl Marx, now he criticized the concept of capitalism, means the private ownership. He argued for revolutionary overthrow of property-based society and path towards communism, and he gave the theory of communism. Now, he explained the theory of communism that collective social control should be there. Nobody should be allowed to, privately own the property. According to him, collective ownership is the main thing by which we can achieve the collective welfare, and also there should be a classless society. Socialists had differing visions: cooperatives versus government intervention, peasants versus worker focus. Now, socialists were also divided. Like some socialists wanted that cooperatives should be there, that people should organize their own cooperatives and we should run ourselves. Versus some people believe that a government should be there who can represent us and who can lead us and who will work for us. Okay, so there was a division. Now, support for socialism. By the late 1800s, socialist parties and worker groups formed in many countries. They called for changes like shorter work hours and voting rights. Socialists did not control government yet, but their ideas influenced new laws. Russian Revolution. Now, in Russia, most people were poor farmers, while a few nobles owned most land. Factories existed only in some cities. The Tsar, now Tsar was the leader, who was the king or monarch in the Russia at that time, Tsar Nicholas. Now, Tsar had total power. In 1917, after years of hardship and war, the Tsar was overthrown. Later that year, Lenin and the Bolshevik Party removed the new government and set up a socialist state. Now, what happened was that Tsar was leading in the Russia, and many problems were there, like long working hours and workers were protesting and everything. But later that year, Lenin led the Bolshevik Party and removed the new government and set up a socialist state. Now, how did that happen? The Russian Empire in 1914, Tsar Nicholas II ruled a vast multi-ethnic empire including Russia, modern Finland, Baltic, Ukraine, Belarus, Caucasus, and Central Asia. Now, religion was predominantly Russian Orthodox, but also included Catholics, Protestants, and Muslims and Buddhists. Now, economy and society. Most people, almost like 85% of the people in Russia, were farmers. Factories were mostly in big cities like St. Petersburg and Moscow. Foreigners invested a lot in building railways and making steel and coal. Factory rules for pay and hours were often ignored. Workshop workers worked up to 15 hours a day. So this was the time how much the labor was exploited. Workers often went on strikes for better conditions. Peasants work on land, but the powerful nobles, who were the rich landowners, the Tsar or the church owned it. So they owned the land. Meanwhile, the peasants were the one who were, cultivating the land. They were working and were exploited by the powerful nobles. Socialism in Russia. Now, before 1914, political parties were not even allowed in Russia. So, socialists secretly organized groups like the Social Democratic Workers' Party and the Socialist Revolutionary Party. So, before 1914, the political parties were illegal in Russia, but secretly the parties were formed, socialist parties mainly. So, socialist revolutionaries believed that Russian peasants, who often shared land, could lead the movement to create a socialist society. Now, socialist revolutionary were those people who believed that Russian peasants, means the farmers who were there, they often shared land and they were familiar with the concept of socialism, because they were sharing everything. So they could lead the movement of socialism to create a socialist society. Meanwhile, there were other socialists who were social democrats, who were led by Lenin. So Lenin was leading the social democrats. Meanwhile, the revolutionaries were led by farmers. So Lenin believed and he thought that the peasants were too divided, and argued that the factory workers in the cities should lead the socialist movement instead. So there was a clear distinction between the socialists who believed that the peasant should lead the movement, and the people who believed that the factory workers or the urban workers should lead the socialist movement. Now the socialist, now the Social Democratic Party itself split into two groups: the Bolshevik led by the Lenin, who wanted a small disciplined party, and the Mensheviks who wanted the party to be open to many people. Now Mensheviks most probably were those who believed that a peasant could lead the movement, and meanwhile the Social Democratic Party divided, and the Bolsheviks were those who the Lenin was leading. Now, the 1905 revolution. Russia was ruled by Tsar who had all the power and was not responsible to any parliament. Liberals and socialists wanted the government to change and give people more say. Economic problems hit the country hard. Real wages dropped by 20%, causing many workers to strike. So, there were many problems during the time of Tsar. Like real wages dropped by 20%, and economic problems were also hitting, and famines were there. And also, liberals and socialists believed that the government should change, that Tsar should not be there. So, on Bloody Sunday, the police killed more than 100 peaceful protesters, which caused great outrage. Now, what happened was some, workers marched to the Winter Palace, the Petrograd. Okay, now they were demanding for equal rights. They were demanding for better working conditions. But instead, what happened was Tsar's soldiers, the soldiers of Tsar, killed more than 100 peaceful protesters. Now, this caused a great outrage in the country. After this, there were many strikes, universities were closed, and groups like Union of the Unions were formed to demand a new elected assembly called Duma. So people started demanding that Duma should be there, which will be new elected assembly. The Tsar allowed the Duma to form, but quickly dissolved it or made sure that it was filled with conservative supporters. So Tsar was influencing the Duma, though he allowed the Duma, but all those people who were dominating in the Duma were the supporters of Tsar. So conservatives were there, which excluded the liberals and revolutionaries. Now, World War One and the Russian Empire. At first, many people in Russia supported the war and united behind the Tsar. However, as the war went on, defeats, the poor leadership made people lose enthusiasm. Now, Tsar dragged Russia into the World War One, and later on, Russia was defeated, and because of poor leadership of Tsar, this made people lose enthusiasm and the little hope they had in Tsar. Now, the economy suffered badly, factories stopped working properly, and there were shortages of food and supplies. These problems caused riots in the cities. Many people became refugees because they had to leave their homes. Famines spread, and people trust in the government and the Tsar decreased a lot. So, after the war, what happened was there were many problems, like riots were caused, and factories stopped working properly, and shortages of food and supplies happened. So famine spread, and people's trust in the government and the Tsar decreased a lot. Now, the February Revolution took place in 1917 in Petrograd. There were food shortages and very cold winter, which made workers more unhappy and restless. Now, everyone was, unsatisfied. On 22nd of February, many factories stopped working because of lockout, so people started protesting against Tsar, leading the widespread strikes, with women playing a leading role. So, women were also leading these movements or the strikes that were there. On 25th February, the Tsar suspended the Duma, which was the parliament, which caused large demonstrations in the streets. Some troops refused to follow orders and joined the protesters. Workers, soldiers, and others formed a council called the Soviet to represent their interests. Now, what happened was Tsar suspended the Duma parliament because conservatives were ruling over there and people were, dissatisfied, which caused a great demonstration in the streets. Now, some troops refused to follow the order. Some soldiers, refused that we will not work for you, and they joined the protesters. Now, workers, soldiers, and other formed a council called Soviet to represent their interests, socialist interests mainly. Now, as a result of these events, Tsar Nicholas II abdicated, gave up his throne on 2nd of March. After his abdication, a provisional government was set up, promising to hold election for a constituent assembly to decide Russia's future. Okay. Now, what happened was Tsar was abdicated. He gave up his throne on 2nd of March. After this, abdication, a provisional government was formed by Lenin. Okay, Lenin was leading the Bolshevik party. Now, it was set up promising to hold elections for a constituent assembly to decide Russia's future. Now, after the February Revolution, the provisional government was mainly influenced by army officials, landowners, and industrialists. It allowed some freedoms, such as the right to hold meetings and form associations, which was not allowed before. Now, during this time, Soviets, means the Workers' Council, spread and gained influence across Russia. In April 1917, Lenin returned and announced his April thesis, demanding an immediate end to the war, giving land to the peasants, and nationalizing banks. Now, what happened after February Revolution? That a provisional government was formed, and the freedom was given to people that everyone can, now hold the meetings or form associations. But during this time, Soviets, the Workers' Council, spread and gained influence across all over the Russia. Now, in April 1917, Lenin returned to Russia and announced his April thesis. According to that, he demanded that there should be no war. Now, war will be ended, and he gave up the land to peasants. Peasants were controlling the land, and now nationalizing the banks. So everything was socialized. He also proposed renaming the Bolshevik Party as the Communist Party to show their new, more radical aims. Now, Lenin also changed the name of the party from Bolshevik Party to the Communist Party. Discontent grew as factory committees began to challenge the factory managers' control. Peasants started seizing land on their own, encouraged by socialist revolutionaries who pushed for land redistribution. Now, this socialist revolution became a little violent somehow. The discontent grew as factory committees began to challenge the factory managers directly, and they controlled. Meanwhile, the factory workers controlled the whole factory, and the peasants started seizing their land on their own, and encouraged by socialist revolutionaries who pushed for land redistribution. So, socialist revolutionaries were there who pushed for land redistribution. So, peasants challenged the landowners. Now, provisional government responded by cracking down on Bolshevik leaders and suppressing their activities. The provisional government, who was the different government who included the mass people, they responded by cracking down on Bolshevik leaders or the communist leaders that were there, and they started suppressing their activities. That this is causing harm to other people as well. We want to build a socialist society where everyone is equal. We don't want to control them. Now, the October Revolution took place in 1917. Before the October Revolution, the Bolsheviks gained growing support, and Lenin called for an armed takeover over the government. Now, Lenin wanted that he want to control the whole government in Russia, as he was leading the Communist Party, so he wanted to make the Russia communist. So between 24th to 25th October 1917, the Bolsheviks led an uprising in Petrograd. They seized the important government buildings, including the Winter Palace, and arrested the ministers of the provisional government. Now, what happened was under Lenin, the Red Guards were working. So these Red Guards arrested the ministers of provisional government, and they basically wanted to overthrow the provisional government. By December 1917, the Bolsheviks had taken control of both Petrograd and the Moscow. After taking power, they nationalized major industries and banks, meaning the government took ownership and control of them. So banks were nationalized and industries were also nationalized. So everything was under the government. Land was declared social property, and peasant took over land previously owned by the nobility. Aristocratic titles were abolished and social reforms were introduced, including changes in housing and new uniforms for the army. Now, you can see that the socialism was turning into communism slowly, because it was getting extreme in its form, as the government wanted to overthrow the provisional government, and they wanted to control everything. Now, the Bolsheviks changed their party name to the Communist Party to reflect their new goals and identity. They dismissed the Constituent Assembly, which had been elected to decide Russia's future because it did not support them. Instead, they set up the All Russian Congress of Soviets as the new parliament, making Russia a one party state controlled by the Communist Party. Now, Bolsheviks changed their party name to Communist Party to reflect their new goals, which were communist in nature. They dismissed the Constituent Assembly, which had been elected to decide the Russia's future. Instead, they set up All Russian Congress of Soviets as a new parliament, making Russia a one party state controlled by the Communist Party. Now, trade unions, which were supposed to protect workers, were brought under strict control of the Communist Party, limiting their independence. The secret police, known as Cheka, later NKVD, were used to spy on people and silence those who criticized the party through censorship and repression. So you can see a sort of dictatorship was, taking place in Russia. The goal was socialism, but it turned to communism, and then later on it turned to autocracy or the dictatorship, because the censorship was there, repression was there, and Cheka, which was the secret spy or police of Lenin, NKVD, they spy on people. They were spying on people, and they were silencing those who criticized the party. So it was turning into the whole communism thing. There were some artistic and cultural developments, such as rise of constructivism and propaganda posters that promoted the communist ideas. However, many people became disillusioned and disappointed because the party controlled everything tightly, limiting freedom and creativity. All this was happening because the socialism was turning into communism, and later on it turned to a sort of dictatorship because the repression was there, and the censorship was there. So Russia was turning into a communist country. Now, civil war took place in Russia. After the Bolsheviks took power, many groups started opposing these Bolsheviks or the Red Guards. Now, these groups were liberals, monarchists, called the Whites, and non Bolsheviks, and the foreign countries like France, Britain, Japan, and USA. So, everyone was opposing Bolsheviks at that time. This opposition led to a civil war marked by widespread violence and famine. So, famine took place due to the war that took place. The harsh actions of the non Bolsheviks against the peasants and the workers caused them to lose popular support. By 1920, the Bolsheviks, also known as the Reds, regained control over most of the former Russian Empire. In December 1922, the Russian Empire was reorganized into the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, USSR. The USSR gave political autonomy to many non Russian nationalities, but this autonomy was limited and controlled by the central government. So, as everybody was opposing Bolsheviks, the civil war broke out in the country, and there was a widespread violence due to which the famine took place. And these harsh actions of non Bolsheviks against the peasants and workers, because they were against communism, not socialism, but they eventually acted against the peasants and workers. So, this caused them to lose popular support, and by 1920, Bolsheviks, also known as the Reds, they regained the control over most of the former Russian Empire. So in December 1922, the Russian Empire was reorganized into the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, which is USSR. Now, USSR gave political independence to many non-Russian nationalities, but this autonomy, this independence, was limited and controlled by the central government, making a socialist society. The Soviet government centralized the economy and introduced 5 year plans starting in 1927 to organize the industrial growth. So they introduced 5 year plans. These plans led to rapid increase in production, especially in oil, coal, and steel, which doubled during the early years. The government improved access to education, public healthcare, and housing for workers. So everything was improving slowly. However, many people still faced tough living and working conditions, which were often difficult and unevenly distributed. Now, many people still faced some, tough living and working condition. They were often difficult and unevenly distributed. So, not everybody was facing these problems, but some were. Stalinism and collectivization. Now, during the grain crisis, many towns faced shortages of food in Russia. Stalin blamed the kulaks, who were richer peasants, accusing them of hiding grain to sell later at high prices. Now, Stalin was the leader who blamed kulaks. Now, kulaks were the richer peasants or the nobles or landowners. So, Stalin accused them of hiding grains to sell later at higher prices. So, according to him, the shortages of food was the result of the self interest of richer peasants. To solve this, the government forced peasants to give up their land, animals, and tools. Small farms were merged into large state run farms called kulkos. Now, the government controlled all aspects of these farms, including what was produced and how it was distributed. Now, after the accusation on the richer peasants, what happened was that government started the collectivization of land. Now, what was that? That the farmlands, different multiple farmlands, were merged into a large one, and state controlled it. Means the government controlled it, and these farms were called kulkos. Now, the government controlled all aspects of farms, including what was produced and how it was distributed. Many peasants resisted by killing their animals. They burned their crops or refused to join the Kulgos farm. The combination of forced collectivization and poor harvest from 1930 to 1933 caused a severe famine, killing more than 4 million people. Now, this forced collectivization and poor harvest led to the death of many people, and many people died, like more than 4 million people, because of famine. Now, Stalin claimed that there were enemies and traitors inside the country, which led to mass arrests, imprisonments, and execution by 1939. This created an atmosphere of widespread fear among the population. So, everyone started fearing Stalin after that. Now, the global influence of the Russian Revolution and the USSR. The Russian Revolution inspired many socialist and communist parties around the world, including the Communist Party of the Great Britain. Now, after the Russian Revolution, many took inspiration from it, including the Communist Party of Great Britain. The USSR became a symbol of socialism globally due to its rapid industrial and agricultural growth. However, the Soviet government also denied many personal freedoms and ruled through strict repression, leading to a mixed legacy that included both admiration and criticism. So, however, the Soviet government also denied many personal freedoms and ruled through, strict laws or repression somehow, which led to a mixed legacy. Some people supported it and some people criticized it. Yeah, so this was all about this chapter. I hope you liked it. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. You can comment down your doubts below. Subscribe to Paathshala for more such lectures and videos. We will meet in the next video. Till then, take care. Bye bye.